Hello, and welcome to Green Dragon, a monthly show where we talk about green initiatives in Maryland and Howard County, ongoing sustainability efforts at Howard Community College, and ideas and ways for you to be more sustainable at home. I'm Bob Marietta, HCC's Environmental Health and Safety Supervisor, and I thank you for watching today. My guest today is Tim Latimer, Howard County's Administrator of the Office of Community Sustainability. Thanks for joining me, Tim.
Hey, Bob. It's great to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Tim, it's been almost a year since you left the federal government to work for Howard County. You spent nearly a decade with the U.S. Department of State's Office of Global Change, where you were part of the team that concluded the landmark Paris Agreement on climate change in 2015. Reading your bio, I have to say that I take comfort from the fact that someone who cares about the environment has security clearance from the national government. So can you compare and contrast for us what it's like to be part of our county executive's climate subcabinet with directors of all the county's departments to working with diplomats from all over the world?
Sure. No, it's a great question, Bob. And first of all, I would say in the international climate negotiations, what we're talking about is bringing together representatives of nearly 200 countries to tackle the most complex negotiations in human history around an existential threat to humanity. And as you can imagine, we have countries that run the gamut of from oil-producing countries that are totally dependent on the production of fossil fuels for their economic livelihood, to countries that have nothing to do with the fossil fuel industry, small island developing states that have very little in the way of greenhouse gas emissions and contribute very little to the problem of climate change, but who are typically the first and worst when it comes to suffering the impacts of climate. So trying to reconcile those widely divergent interests across nearly 200 countries is extraordinarily difficult and slow and often painful. And it's certainly not at a scale and a pace that we need to maintain to be in line with what the science is telling us we need to do in the coming years. So it really is a challenge. So that's kind of at the global level. And so trying to find a consensus, is really difficult. Now here locally, as part of the subcabinet that the county executive appointed, County Executive Calvin Ball appointed department heads across the administration to serve on this subcabinet to collaborate in implementing the county's Climate Forward Climate Action and Resiliency Plan that we launched a year ago. And what I have found is that we have a great degree of collaboration and a sense of shared enterprise. Which isn't to say that every office is totally aligned with every other office. We do have our differences. We have different imperatives in different parts of the community that we serve. But I think on balance, we have leadership that is very clear about the overall direction. And we're all working toward trying to achieve the goals that are set forth in that plan and trying to find the most effective ways to deliver results. So I'm really optimistic about the progress that we've made so far in the past year, and more optimistic about the progress that I'm hopeful we're going to make in the coming years.
Tim, a decade ago, the former county executive changed the name of your department from environmental sustainability to community sustainability. Now, how much difference does that make in your department's goals and county citizens' perceptions?
As I understand it, the former county executive, when he came in 2014, did not want to be seen as the environmental guy compared to his earlier predecessor. And in fact, I think even he had contemplated eliminating our office, which would have been really problematic. But folks, I think in the community persuaded him that that would be a bad idea. So he changed the name of the office, but kept it. So he changed it from the Office of Environmental Sustainability to the Office of Community Sustainability, and really did not put a great degree of emphasis on environment, did not really talk publicly about the climate crisis, much less acknowledge its reality and take steps affirmatively toward tackling the climate crisis. So I think it made a difference in terms of the emphasis. I think folks in the office here at the time continued to do things that were aimed at promoting sustainability, but they had to work within the parameters set by the elected leadership at the time. And that's the way our system is designed to work. It's the elected leadership that sets the overall policy direction. So since I came into this office a year ago, I have had people ask me about the name of the Office of Community Sustainability, and whether we might contemplate changing its name back to the Office of Environmental Sustainability, or perhaps changing it to the Office of Climate and Sustainability. That's not my call. Obviously, that's a call at a higher pay grade than mine. I would say that while the intent of that name change a decade ago may have been to downplay the importance of environment, I also feel like, ironically, calling it the Office of Community Sustainability gets at some of the fundamental aspects of what we are trying to do here, which is recognizing that advancing sustainability and climate action is not just about the environment. It is about building a stronger, more resilient community. And so the efforts that we are undertaking through a whole of government approach, as directed by the Climate Subcabinet, also requires a whole of community approach. So there is a part of me that sort of ironically feels like the name of community sustainability actually can work in this context. There are others who might feel like at some point we might want to change it to the Office of Climate and Sustainability. But again, I don't want to speculate about whether that might ever materialize. I think for myself and for the team, we are very clear about what our priorities are and what our focus is in the coming years. And that is implementing our climate forward, climate action and resiliency plan, and really making sure that it delivers results for the community. And beyond that, it almost doesn't matter what our office is named, because that is our focus, and we are working to promote that kind of collaboration across the administration. So I feel like we're getting more and more buy-in also across different departments because we're working collaboratively, and others can see the interests that they have in advancing this kind of work.
Well, I for one think the name is perfect, and so I hope you wind up keeping it. Now, if all the county's departments are collaborating on sustainability issues, can we look forward to other large local organizations like the public schools, Columbia Association, Howard Community College, along with private companies, beginning to collaborate on these same issues?
That is definitely my hope and my aim in this position, which is to have our office help to serve as a catalyst for greater collaboration across multiple institutions. For example, one of the big challenges that we have in general on the environment is waste management. And things like food waste in particular, which as the food decomposes in the landfill, generates methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas or climate pollutant. So we have a real interest in reducing the amount of food waste for multiple reasons, and one of them is climate. So we have large institutions, whether it's the community college or the school system and other major institutions here, where there's a fair amount of food waste. And so that's one of the areas we're looking to see where we can generate more collaboration. And there's some tremendous opportunities there that I think we're seeing some possibilities with. So definitely, at the institutional level, as well as at the level of the business community. When I talk about a whole of community approach, I don't mean only the residents who are interested in climate and sustainability issues doing things, but also our business community. Because at the end of the day, you cannot have a sustainable enterprise if the community that you are in is not sustainable. In other words, if your employees and your customers are in a situation where they are subject to the impacts of climate change, that's going to affect your business interests. So I do believe that there is an interest that the business community has in moving toward investing in clean energy, energy efficiency, reducing packaging, et cetera, both for environmental reasons as well as for economic prosperity reasons. So I do think that as we promote climate action, I'm hopeful that we're going to see more in the private sector actually beginning to step up more than they have in the past.
Do you think programs like the Weed Warrior Leadership Training, currently offered by the Columbia Association and the Howard Community College, could be adopted by county government and others to involve county citizens in the restoration and maintenance of our natural areas and resources throughout the county?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, you may recall when the county executive delivered his State of the County remarks last October at Howard Community College, among the things that he talked about was expanding Howard County's tree canopy to reach 50% tree coverage by 2030, which is an acceleration of the goal that we had set in our climate action plan to reach that level of tree canopy by 2045. That means we have to gain a lot more acreage in tree planting over the next 6 years or so to be able to attain that goal. And that is something that requires much more community participation and engagement. It cannot be only the county government that's doing the tree planting, for example. But part of that also involves saving what we have. So the other thing that he mentioned in his remarks was instituting a tree savers program. And I know the Columbia Association already has a similar program. And we're actually beginning to explore with the Columbia Association ways that we can collaborate more closely on climate and sustainability and on things like trees, tree saver programs, and that sort of thing. In fact, there is a new director of the Columbia Association's Sustainability Office who has recently came on board, and the head of our Department of Recreation and Parks, Nick Mooneyhan, and myself and others on our respective teams will be meeting with her next week to talk specifically about where we can collaborate on the trees and open space and sort of the weed warrior / tree savers kinds of activities, as well as other areas of potential collaboration on the climate and sustainability front. Because I think if we can bring together the tremendous institutional know-how and capacity and assets that both the county and the Columbia Association have to work more synergistically, we could have a really tremendously positive influence on the direction the county goes in and that Columbia goes in going forward into the future.
Well, Tim, you have an incredible staff working for you at the Sustainability Office, and we can all see what they are doing on your website, livegreenhoward.com. But there are so many competing web and Facebook pages, along with Teams and Google groups and calendar services. Do you think not having a local paper hurts sustainability efforts? And can online services like the Baltimore Banner and the Guilford Gazette ever fill our communication gap?
Yeah, that is a really tough question, right? I mean, I think we have seen a real change in the media landscape in recent years. I don't pretend to know all the dynamics that have led to where we are, but I do draw some hope from what I've seen with the Baltimore Banner, for example, which you mentioned. I also think that from the standpoint of the work that we do, it's important for us also to go to where the eyeballs are. In other words, if people are getting their information increasingly from other sources, social media and the like, I think we have to have a presence there. And I say that because in tackling the climate crisis, we are also entering into an arena where the information environment has been heavily polluted by vested interests who want to maintain the status quo of a fossil fuel-based economy. We know that we are already undergoing an energy revolution, and we need to accelerate that if we're going to preserve a livable climate for ourselves and our kids and future generations. But we also have to be competing in the information space, which is one of the reasons why in my office, we actually brought on board last fall a new colleague to serve as our outreach specialist. She has a background in public relations, public information, and she has a real good knack for knowing how to sort of get our information out there in ways that are going to be read and absorbed by our stakeholders. So I've told our team that our community engagement and our outreach, whether it's in the media, social media, and in community events, to me, that is as important as the substance of what we do. Because if we're going to build and sustain community support and investment in tackling the climate crisis, we need to actually help folks in the community understand why we are doing what we are doing and what it means for them. And also for us to have opportunities to get meaningful and constructive feedback from the community on things that we can pay more attention to. So I think we're just dealing with a very dynamic information environment. We need to be nimble, and we need to, like I said, go to where the eyeballs are, because we're not controlling the information environment. We just simply need to find out how we can best harness the tools that are out there and get our message out and get the feedback back in.
Yeah, I second your recommendation to go with the Baltimore Banner. I've been finding them very responsive to Howard County issues, and hope they'll continue it. I know they have plans to bring on even more reporters. So if you were a new resident to this area and wanted to understand the issues of climate change and other sustainability issues, how would you look to become enlightened without being overwhelmed? I know at the recent Green Fest, there were 23 different climate organizations, sustainability groups that were vying for people's attention. So how does someone keep from being overwhelmed and even discouraged by what seems like competition among all these well-meaning organizations?
Yeah, that's a really great observation, Bob. I would say that it may be both a blessing and a curse that we have such a high degree of activism and interest in the community. I tend to think of it more as a real blessing. And I say that because I was active myself before I was involved in county government in the activist community. And I think that's where a lot of the energy is in terms of new ideas and pushing elected officials and policymakers forward on issues that they may be a little bit more hesitant to lean in on. But that said, you're absolutely right. If you're a newcomer to Howard County or to any community, you first of all want to find out like who's doing what's going on, and then figure out, you have to find ways to get in where you feel you fit in. There are some organizations that are not a good fit for some individuals. They may be interested in particular facets of policy. Others may want to get their hands, into the soil to do things and do some hands-on stuff. And so I think part of it is finding the organizations, the nonprofits, and the groups that you resonate most with, and maybe that's where you feel a sense of affinity because you've found your crowd that you can be with.
Now, I know you grew up in California and studied economics and the environment, and worked for that state government on environmental issues before joining the federal government, and then traveling around the world. After all that, you chose to live in Howard County and in Columbia. Can you describe how you decided to become part of this community and why?
Well, it was partly accidental. We first moved here in 2002. We'd been living overseas in Latin America and the Philippines. We came back. I grew up, as you mentioned, in Southern California. I didn't really know anything about this area. We had two little kids in 2002, and we were looking to buy a place to set down some roots for our kids to be able to grow up in. But I also had to commute to Washington, D.C. And at that time, we could not afford to look inside the Beltway because we were going to be living on a single income. And I had no desire to live in Northern Virginia, where most of my foreign service colleagues had settled, because I just find it to be so overbuilt and over-trafficked as to be unlivable. So we really looked here at Maryland, and my wife heard something about this funky old town called Ellicott City, and I knew nothing about it. And when I did a little homework before we left Peru in 2002, we came here and started looking around, and I really loved the green spaces that I saw here in Columbia. I knew nothing about Columbia's history. And mind you, I had been an environmental planner and a land planner out west and involved in, master plan efforts for communities, new towns in Southern California. But I knew nothing about Columbia's history and origins at the time. But we found a place we really liked. We had woods right behind us. We live right near Waterloo Elementary School. And it was close enough to the train station that I could go and hop onto the MARC train to commute to DC every day. So for many years, for the first 3 years we were here, and then we were back overseas for 6, and then we came back for good in 2011. But for years, Howard County and Columbia were effectively my bedroom. I would get up, leave often in the dark, go into Washington, D.C., work hard, come home at night, sleep a little bit, and then go back to Washington, D.C. So I didn't really know my community so well, but over time, really came to appreciate the intentionality that went into the design and development of Columbia over the years to be a community that was not only focused on a balance between environment and development, but also the social, economic, and racial equity and the values that went into forming Columbia. That really appealed to my family and me. And so it's one of the reasons why we decided to stay put here.
Do you have a favorite wild spot in the county that you keep returning to find yourself? Now, if you don't want to give it away, just share with us what a space like that does for you and why we should all find at least one such spot.
I think we all need such spots, maybe even multiple spots, right? Because that's a way for us to recharge our batteries and to reconnect and to remember why it's important. So for me and for my wife, we actually like to get out and go on walks around the lakes here in Howard County. In particular, we like Lake Elkhorn. I really love the setting and just the tranquility there. So that's one area that we often will go to enjoy a respite from the hurly-burly of daily living in an urbanized community. The other, I don't know if I'd call it a secret spot, honestly, is right in my own backyard. Right behind my house, there are some woods along Dorsey Run Creek, and those woods are between our house and Waterloo Elementary School. And I really came to appreciate it during the depths of the pandemic. I was working from home, and I would go out to walk the dog, and I discovered or rediscovered what I loved about Columbia and Howard County, which is the green space. Because as I was out walking the dog through each season, I could actually observe the changes in the vegetation on a daily basis and just sort of feel much more in tune with our own local environment, much more so than I ever felt when I was commuting to Washington, D.C. And like I said, leaving in the dark and coming home in the dark. And, some days waking up and realizing, oh, wow, we've gone from winter to spring. How did that happen? Or we've gone from spring to summer or from summer to fall, and not really having a sense of how those changes happened. But being able to get out every day and go for a nice walk or to take the dog for a walk and experience that, it just helps keep one grounded and reminds one of what really matters and why we do the work that we do.
Were there any experiences you had growing up, other than Grateful Dead music, that led you to pursue the career you have led in sustainability and the environment?
Yeah, I'm sure we're all products of multiple influences. Listening to the Grateful Dead is certainly one of my favorite pastimes. I love their music. But I would also say, I was a child of the 60s and the 70s. And I was a Boy Scout as a kid, learned to appreciate nature, et cetera. When I was in the 8th grade, it was around the time of the very first Earth Day, back around 1970. And I and others in my class, we formed an environmental club. We called it Students That Oppose Pollution, STOP. So I always had that in my sort of frame of reference, never knew that it would actually lead to a career. But, when I was deciding on a major at college and thinking about the future, I came to the realization that every job involves problem solving of some kind. So whether you are the person who is sweeping the floor or whether you're the chief executive officer of an organization, you're solving problems. That's what you're getting paid to do. So I thought, what are the problems that I want to devote myself to? Number one, that I feel passionate about, but two, are not likely to go away during my working life. And sadly, I had to conclude that the environmental problems were not likely going to go away in my lifetime. So that's what I decided to dedicate myself to. I got my bachelor's degree in economics initially. And it was actually a course I took in environmental economics that really sort of opened my eyes to how those two disciplines actually can converge, and we can actually grow the economy at the same time as we are protecting and improving our environmental conditions. So there was that influence. Plus, I got really active in the late 70s and early 1980s in the anti-nuclear and peace movement. So that's where I sort of cut my initial chops in the activist world. And I learned that if you are anti anything, you can burn out very quickly. It's when you become pro something, when you become focused on something that is life affirming, you can develop a lot more energy for and bring your passion to the work that you're doing, much more so than when you are anti something, because standing in opposition sometimes has its place, don't get me wrong. But if that's like what you do all the time, every time, it can become kind of limiting. And I think ultimately sort of self-defeating, particularly if you feel like you're in it by yourself. So it was sort of working in that space that really led me then to choose a career in the environmental field. I worked as an environmental planner for different land planning and environmental planning firms in Southern California. And then I was with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California before the Foreign Service beckoned. And I actually joined the Foreign Service as an outgrowth of my attendance at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. That was like the first big sort of environmental summit where we had over 100 heads of state. And that's where, among other things, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was opened for signature, and the Convention on Biodiversity and other outcomes came out of that process. And I was there as a member of a nonprofit. I was a volunteer. And I was not happy with what I saw with the US administration at that time. And I didn't feel like they were leaning in enough on the issue. So my wife, who had been a Peace Corps volunteer in the Philippines in the mid 80s, she wanted to go back and work overseas. And I said, well, if we're going to work overseas, I was interested in international issues at that point. And I thought perhaps the State Department could use people who have a background in environment. So I applied for the Foreign Service, and they foolishly let me in. And I did that for about 30 years. And it was rewarding and enlightening and a real privilege. And I really learned a lot from it. And I gained a much greater appreciation for our own country as well.
Wow, that's amazing and very enlightening. Well, we have reached the end of our show. Thank you, Tim, for joining me today. I'll be back next month with another guest and another sustainable topic. In the meantime, if you have ideas or comments, you can connect with me at rmarietta@howardcc.edu. You can listen to this and all of our other podcasts at dragonpodcast.podbean.com. And you can also catch us on HCC TV and the YouTube channel. Thank you.